Thanks for coming today. I know it's wonderful spring weather here in Rochester, but I appreciate you coming out to learn about raptors. My name is Daena Ford. I'm a president of Braddock Bay Raptor Research. And if you've never heard of Braddock Bay Raptor Research, we are a nonprofit that works towards studying the birds of prey and the migration that happens particularly in the spring, and then educating people about it. So good morning, come on in. Anyone been to Braddock Bay before? Okay, okay, great. So if you have not been there, I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the beginning, and then we'll get into our local raptor species. But Braddock Bay is up on Lake Ontario in Greece, and because it's positioned right on the southern shore of Lake Ontario, it's a prime spot for spring migration to see, because it gathers the birds and concentrates them there. We'll talk a little bit about why, in just a few minutes, and then so it provides a great opportunity not just for people to come out and enjoy it and view all kinds of different species, but to study these birds in good concentration. So that's what a lot of the work we do as an organization involves, but it also involves a lot of education. So I'm here today to talk to you about raptors. I also have a couple of our special guests. I have one on the part of the table, which at the end, you'll get to meet a couple of live birds of prey that we use for educational purposes. So we can hit the lights and I can get the slides going here. So we're here today to talk raptors. And if those of you who don't know what a raptor is, if you're not that familiar, or maybe sometimes people come in thinking, dinosaurs, you get a little confusion there, but we're really referring to birds of prey. So it includes things like hawks, eagles, owls, falcons, vultures even. So that's the focus today. Many of you maybe even have come across some of these birds in your travels or in your backyard. On your own adventures, there are raptors all around us, and just takes a little bit of eye-opening to see the diversity that's out there. So our mission as an organization, as I mentioned to you briefly, is really the focus on the research on the spring migration of raptors that happens at Braddock Bay, and take that information, we share it with the scientific community and general public in a lot of variety of ways. And all of this is meant to help protect the area and provide information that kind of backs up the need for the habitat there for migrating birds, but also other wildlife, and for our own enjoyment too and benefit. Okay, so here's a map to kind of give you a lay of land and where Braddock Bay is. So we're down here somewhere, it's a Brighton area at the birdhouse, but Braddock Bay is up on Lake Ontario. This is basically the town of Greece, or North Greece. We're very close to the village of Hilton. It's part of the Braddock Bay Wildlife Management Area, which much of it is managed by the New York State DEC. But you can see we're lots of water all around us. And so raptors are generally kind of flying along the southern shore of Lake Ontario. They have to go around the Great Lakes on their journeys north, because there's not enough warm air over those big bodies of water to give them the lift they need to save energy. So we're in a perfect spot that concentrates them there. And just a little bit about the management area there. It is right in the middle of suburban Rochester, if you're familiar at all. There's a lot of development along these ponds, some of these ponds here where there's neighborhoods and housing. So all of these green and pink parcels are part of the acreage that is protected for wildlife there. So it encompasses, I think it's getting close to 3,000 acres. It's definitely over 2,000, somewhere in between. That's protected habitat for birds and other wildlife there. So really, really important stuff for birds, not just raptors either. Lots of thousands and thousands of other types of birds, waterfowl, songbirds, use the habitat as well. Okay. Here's a hawk's eye view of Braddock Bay there. This is the Hawk Watch platform. If you go to Braddock Bay Park, this is where we do our raptor migration count, or our Hawk Watch. I encourage you to come up and visit. But out here, as you can see, the bay and then the lake is Lake Ontario's out in the distance there. A lot of wetlands habitat here, but there's also around, there's like woodlands and forests and meadows. So a good diversity of habitat there that can support a lot of different species as well. Okay, so the Hawk Watch is the place to go in the spring. We are right in the middle almost of our spring migration. It goes from March through the end of May, March 1st, May 31st. And it's open to the public to come out and view. We do hire a hawk counter, someone who's actually out there every day to keep tally of the birds that are traveling through. So it's their job to keep the count, but also to interact and welcome visitors and teach them about what's going on. It's a pretty popular thing to do. And we're getting really close. End of April is usually when the peak of migration is. So we're getting really close to that as we approach time there. And this is what we look forward to. We'll be seeing these in a couple of weeks. We've had some pretty good big groups of days of turkey vultures, but this is a big kettle or group of hawks. These are all broad-winged hawks in the sky here. You'll get a chance to meet one of those in person at the end of the presentation. So a kettle of hawks, that's what we call that big grouping. They are kettling or riding thermals. So you get the term kettle because it kind of resembles a bubbling up and down swirling motion like a boiling kettle. So when these raptors are coming through, when they're traveling at all, they are built with soaring capability. Those large wings catch updrafts, they catch thermals. And when they're riding a thermal, that's they're circling and they're gaining altitude. Then they glide down and look for more thermals. So that up and down swirling motion is what coins the term a kettle or kettling here. But sometimes the sky is just filled with hawks. It's pretty incredible. So just to give you an idea of what our numbers end up being and the diversity of raptors that we do have around here, we can see up to 17 different species of birds of prey. So that includes vultures, eagles. Well, we get both bald eagles and golden eagles, but many more balds. All these different types of hawks, okay? And even some falcons. The falcon species are down there on the bottom list there. So we average about 54,000 raptors per season. And again, it's just those 3 months of the year. The best time to come visit us, not on a day like today. We need a good southwest wind, no precipitation of any type. And that's what's going to push them up against the lakeshore and concentrate them so we can view them better. So there can be days when we can have hundreds or even thousands passing through. Our biggest day so far this year has been a little over 5,000 raptors, and most of those were turkey vultures, but we had a good number of sharp-shinned hawks that day and some kestrels and red tails mixed in too. Okay, so what is a raptor? What makes them different from other birds? So they are predators, so they are hunting birds, so they have certain characteristics that group them within or join them together within that group, because there's plenty of other birds that will eat other animals too, like herons and such. But what's a raptor? The meaning of the word, there's a few different derivatives of the word raptor. One of those is plunderer. In other words, they're coming in and they're capturing and killing their prey, right? To seize and carry away is also another meaning of that word, rapteri. And they do that by using all these features or adaptations, physical adaptations. They first spot their prey with their vision. That's their strongest sense. That's what they're known for. So if you've ever heard someone say, I'm going to watch you like a hawk, come on in, grab a seat. That's where that phrase comes from. They have the ability to see a great distance, but also a lot more clarity and detail. They have talons, very strong, grasping feet with sharp claws. That is how they capture their food, their prey. They use that hooked beak to tear, not so much for capturing their food. So the talons for grabbing on killing, and then the beak for helping them eat it. And they have to be capable of pretty powerful flight in order to overtake their prey. Some of them hunt things that are on the ground, but others capture birds out of the sky. So they have to be that much faster and stronger to accomplish that. We have about 34 different species in North America. We see about half of them here, as you know, especially during migration.
Excuse me.
And then we also get, I'm not going to talk about owls today, but that was another topic. We do include owls in the group of raptors. There's about 19 species of those in North America. Okay, well, let's focus a little closely on what lives around here. So I'm going to go through some of the more common species that we'll see and talk about how to identify them, where you can find them too. So what kind of raptors live here? Anyone want to take a guess at what's up on the wall here, this slide? Yeah, this one in flight is a red-tailed hawk. So it has kind of that rusty reddish tail. It's on the underside, so it's not as bright as it would be from the top side. There has a little bit of a belly band on a kind of whitish chest there, and some dark, we call patagials or triangles right at the armpits or the wing pits of the bird. Anyone want to guess? This one's a harder one. And we'll get into this. But not a falcon, but I could see why you think that, because that gray color, much shorter wings than a falcon would have.
His beak's tiny.
Yeah, tiny little beak. Yeah. This is a sharp-shinned, looking very much larger than life. Sharp-shins are only about the size of a body. But here's one that's very recognizable. Okay, so we'll start with some of the big birds, the big raptors here. Everybody knows our iconic bald eagle. As an adult bird, they have that classic white head, white tail, pretty dark brown or blackish looking body, and a really big yellow beak and yellow eye. They're unmistakable. Bald eagles are one of those success stories in conservation too, so we're starting to see them more and more just kind of everywhere around here. Their population has grown quite a bit, and we have seen that with our migration numbers too. So in flight, they have, of course, very huge, long, wide wings. They are pretty uniformly in width there. But this is, even in flight, you can usually pick out that white head and white tail of an adult bird. Okay? But this is also a bald eagle. Okay, and this is just a juvenile bird. It's a younger bird. It takes a bald eagle about close to 5 years before they get that pure white and head and tail. In every year leading up to that point is a different amount of dark and light pattern on those immature feathers there. We know this is a juvenile because all the flight feathers are pretty even, and they have a lot of this white, especially in the closer to the body on these parts of the wings here, and a very dark belly as well. So we have a lot of the juvenile eagles around and the immature birds that come through too, as well as some adults. But it's something that confuses people a little bit. I see a big dark eagle looking bird and might assume it must be a golden eagle because it doesn't have that white head. More often around our area, it is an immature bald eagle. Not to say we don't get goldens, but it's more often that. So we do look closely at that. Another kind of eagle-like bird, or one of the big birds, and has a huge wingspan. So eagles have about 6 to 7 foot wingspan. This is a turkey vulture, very comparable wingspan, about 6 feet wide, but they have some different features. Of course, when you get to see them up close, that headless or featherless head, is very much a key feature of vultures and is very critical to their survival. They are carrion eaters, so they are scavengers eating dead things, sometimes very messy dead things, so that can get all over their feathering if they had feathers on the head. Having a bare head, that helps keep them cleaner. and they can sit out in the sun and let the sun, help sterilize the germs away. So it's a very useful thing for these vultures. So, but they spend a lot of time on the ground as well, and they're big dark birds. So that's why they kind of get the name turkey vulture. They have a little bit of resemblance to like our wild turkey, which also is a colorful featherless head and is a big dark brown bird in general. Okay. In flight, they are one of the most graceful birds ever. I truly will stick to my guns on that one. And they're very easy to recognize. They're one of the first raptors and birds of prey that people will learn to recognize, because they have this telltale. Well, first of all, let's look at the photo on the right with all the little bees flying through the sky. So they hold their wings upright in like a V or dihedral, and which is very opposite of what a bald eagle does. They do very flat wings and very straight edge there. So all these little V's, V for vulture, might help you know that if you see the profile of the bird. But in flight, and you see that, especially when you see the underside, you see all these beautiful silvery flight feathers, and the top part of that is all dark. So you have this two-tone effect that really often stands out from quite a distance too. Their head's going to look a lot smaller too because of the lack of feathering there. So that's going to be another thing to look for as well. So, yes.
That is a great picture showing the diversity of seeing the color. Like you might see something dark, you might not see the light.
Yes.
And that shows such
Yeah.
such a great picture of that to show how what you're looking at, because we didn't have a light situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, you definitely the lighting can play tricks on you, and you don't always see colors, but you will often see the pattern. The dark versus light, and even in poor light, a lot of times you can see this with turkey vultures. So grab a quick drink.
I see a lot of turkey vultures, and the ones I've seen, I haven't seen any of the white. I've just seen what seems very dark. So am I maybe seeing black vultures instead?
Well, black vulture, and I unfortunately don't have a slide of that. They will only have like the silvery feathers on their primaries or the outer, so it's not gonna continue all the way along the wing there. It'll just be at the end, so you might only see that. They also have really shorter tails, and it depends again on the lighting. And it's possible it could be something like it could be a young eagle, but usually see some sort of white flecking there. It just could be the lighting too. To take a look, but looking for other features, and this is true for when you're trying to identify any bird. If you don't always go by just one characteristic. Try to find at least something else there. There's always multiple characteristics that ID birds, so look for other signs. Okay. Another big bird, big raptor that we have that comes through here, and they just started showing up in our area this month. The osprey. Similar to eagles in that they are fish eaters, the bald eagles anyways. More exclusively fish eaters though for osprey, which is why they tend to not winter so far north. They really depend on open water for food supply. They're not as much of a carrion eater, or they don't eat much of other prey. Those giant fish hook talons there and very rough surface feet help them hold on and grasp the prey. They have super long, dark wings. The wingtip is all the way down here past the tail, as you can see. Very white-chested, and the big bulging eyes, but that black kind of raccoon-like mask is another key feature of osprey. And that's something that you'll be able to notice from in flight. If you get the side view, you can still see that black mask kind of coming from the eye there. It's getting a little restless. So in flight, they have very crooked-like wings, okay, almost gull-like. They found them around water, so it kind of matches. They're very nice, buoyant flight there, but they're almost opposite pattern of the turkey vulture, where they're very white on the body and a little bit of the wing here, and darker. Although there's a lot more, pattern and barring in those flight feathers. They also usually have darker wrists here, there. But that's the kind of overall shape of osprey. Another way to identify them is they hold their fish face head first in flight. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but it is a characteristic that's very common with osprey. You know, you'll see eagles carrying fish too often, but they're usually, you know, all over the place. They're not always in this position. Osprey will turn their fish when they catch them, so they are head into the direction they're flying. It's a little more aerodynamic. And also makes it a little easier to try to identify the fish when they're flying the way they've got. It's can be kind of fun to do. But yeah. Okay. We're getting to another raptor that's kind of in a group all its own too, and large winged, but actually very small body for this bird. Wingspan on a northern harrier is very similar. I feel like 4 to 5 feet almost. If you stretched them all the way out, they're so winged, really. But they have this small, slender body. Northern harriers, they used to be called the marsh hawk because they do inhabit a lot of the wetlands and grassland habitat. That is what they prefer for nesting and wintering too. So this is a female on the left and a male on the right. This is one of the raptor species that have different plumages for their sexes. A lot of them look the same, like even all the birds we saw so far, pretty similar in plumage, male and female, but very distinct difference. The male we often nickname the gray ghost because they're very, very gray on top and white underneath. They just have these black primaries, like they're all dressed up, they have these black gloves on, very dapper looking. The female is much more colored like this, her surroundings she'd be nesting in, kind of pheasant-like in their pattern of their feathers, because they nest on the ground. So in the grasses and in the grasslands there. So that's a unique feature of the harriers too. So not all raptors nest in big stick nests and trees and things like that. So these are ground nesting birds. There's a really nice shot of how they fly, and you can see that huge wingspan there. They're pretty narrow long wings, pretty long tail. Really key feature is to look for that white rump patch right on the base of the tail. Both male and female have that, and juveniles too have that white rump, and it stands out very well as a good field mark when you're trying to identify these birds too. What's another unique feature about harriers? Just see if I can go back to this one here. We look at the head of that bird. You see this kind of half circle of feathering here. They have a partial facial disc, which is very similar to an owl. Owls have huge circles. Harriers have facial disc too, which helps with hearing. So they depend on their vision for hunting, but also their hearing as well. So when they're hunting, like in this slider, they often hunt fairly low to the ground with their head down, looking but listening for the rustling of their prey in the grasslands and such. So they're very active hunters. They're not like a red tail that sits and waits for something to come along more or less. Okay. So now we're going to get into 3 different groups of raptors. So the majority of all the rest of our raptors are either in one of these 3 groups. We have 2 types of hawks, which are the buteos that I'm going to go over first. Buteo hawks are some of our larger raptors. They have long, wide wings and shorter tails. They're really built for soaring flight. So things like red-tailed hawks, rough-legged hawks, red-shouldered, and broad-winged hawks. Those are the 4 common species here that we put in their genus is Buteo. They are the soaring hawks. So they're really found in a little bit more open habitats, but some will go a little bit deeper into the forest there. And we're going to cover just a couple of these species, particularly red tails and broadwings. I could show red shoulders in here or not. But most people, they've seen a hawk. This is what they've seen, a red-tailed hawk. And while the tail isn't like a bright red, like a cardinal color, it is reddish brown, especially in the eastern part of their range. Our eastern birds, that's typically what the markings are going to look like from underneath there. They have long, wide wings, okay? They're usually a pale colored chest area or underside body, but a little bit of dark feathers across the belly called a belly band. And they have dirty armpits. They actually have these are called patagial marks. This is the patagium, which is the fleshy part of the wing there. And they are dark markings. They're the only hawk we have in our area that has those dark patagials. So something to look for. But often you see them perched. They're one of the birds that stands out along our highways, in our open spaces. They're a very visible hawk. If you drive the thruway or the expressways, especially the thruway, I was always fun to like count the red tails that you see. And this is a good time of year to do that. I think I had like 15 on the way to Buffalo the other day. So, there can be more. But sitting perched, they're pretty much a brown bird, but red tails usually have some amount of white markings on the back. They have really long wings. So here's the tips of the wings compare that to how much tail is protruding beyond. Really shorter tail. So that's what you want to look for, the proportion of wings to tail when you're trying to figure out what you're looking at. That can help you narrow down what the possibilities might be. So we know we have a booty hawk. We can see the color of this adult bird's tail. It is that reddish brown as well. On the other side here on the right is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. So you can't quite, the wingtips are kind of blocked by the shadows and the branches there, but this is a bit of the wingtip right here, shorter tail. It's not red though, right? But it takes a red-tailed hawk about a year or two or and a half to get their full red tail. So that just like eagle, we talked about the bald eagles having juvenile plumage and taking some years to get there. A lot of our raptors have a juvenile plumage too. So the young ones look a little different than the adults. But there's that thick, I have a belly band. So that's something that both ages will have. Okay. So here's a juvenile in flight compared. They're pretty much the same wing shape. Still a little dark on the patagials here, a little belly band here. And though that the tail though is not that reddish color, it has a lot of thin, what we call barring in that tail or striping. So that's going to be a clue that it's a juvenile bird. Okay. I did keep the red-shouldered hawk in here, and this is one that does tend to like a little more swampier areas for nesting. But they do live in the Northeast, all over the eastern U.S. as well. We get quite a few during migration in the early part of the season, so they start to show up in March as they're heading back to their breeding grounds too. Red-shouldered, now this is where they get their name, this kind of reddish patch that looks like the shoulder of the bird, but if you know wing anatomy, it's not quite that. But we'll just go with it looks like the shoulders there for you. We'll not get too technical. That reddish patch is an adult, but that's not actually, I think, the most prominent feature of red shoulders because you're not always going to be able to see them sitting perched. But if you notice that these birds have really dark tail with these thin, bright white bands. Also, they're very kind of rusty colored, rufous colored on the chest and the upper part of the wings. Lots of black and white striping or barring. And that kind of, even when they're sit perched, that black and white patterns like a checkerboard almost effect. That's what stands out. And then when you see them backlit from in flight, you have these light areas. There's almost crescent-shaped windows where the light comes through on the wings. And that's something that will stand out from a distance too. If you get the right angle, you'll see those crescent-shaped windows on the wing panels there. But they're still a boodio, so very long wings compared to a shorter tail. And here's a juvenile red-shouldered hawk. Very different looking, kind of plainish. No dark patagials like the red tail, okay? Lots of barring in the tail. kind of a messy chest, no defined belly band. You can make out a little bit of those crescents, that light pattern that shows through the wings. So red shoulder's another video that we get here. And then this is what I get really excited for. I showed you this already. I just had to throw it in again because the broad-winged hawks are really the spectacle when they start to come through. Right around mid-April is usually when the first broad-wings arrive. These birds winter in Central and South America, so they have great, huge migration to take. They make it up here usually by mid-April. A lot of them will nest in our forests, but a lot more go up into Canada as well. You're welcome to come in and sit if you'd like.
I said we'll stand for a little while.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, here, whatever's comfortable. So with a broad-winged hawk, they have these, again, long, wide wings, like their name says, broad-winged, shorter tails, very unmarked, really, pretty uniform, but they have this really thick, dark, trailing edge of the wing there. Like someone outlined it with a magic marker so you'd see it better. That's why it's thick. Plus the tail has a really thick, wide, white band in it as an adult bird. So this is a juvenile broadwing. Again, looks a lot like the red shoulder, don't you think? So they're a little different in markings, but very similar shape, of course. The tail pattern is different, but they do have some sort of thick bands on the end of it usually there. No crescents, no patagials, very uniform, kind of a plain bird there. They do have fewer primaries or fingers on the outer part of their wing. They have only 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, whereas the others have 5. They have an extra one. That's a little detail that might not stick with you, but if you are someone who's trying to learn a little more tips on the ID, that might be helpful. Okay, you're going to get to meet a broadwing shortly, so we'll talk a little more about that. The next group of birds, these are the birds that the raptors that will visit your backyard most frequently. The sharp-shinned and the Cooper's hawk belong in a group of raptors we call the accipitrines now. The third accipitrine is the northern goshawk, which is a rare visitor to our area. We do get them as migrants, but they're very rare. So we're going to focus just on the sharp-shinned and the Coopers. Note the shape is the little opposite of a buteo. They have short, rounded wings and longer tails, okay? They are built for chasing little birds through the thickets. So short wings help keep them from bumping into branches, and that long tail is a rudder. So it helps the longer a bird's tail, the sharper the turns they can make and the more maneuverable they are. They also will flap a little more in flight. You know, when they're migrating, you see a few more flaps, not as much soaring as the buteos will do. So we'll start with the smaller one, the sharp-shinned hawk. The shin is not a feature everybody gets to see, even in the field through binoculars. Maybe if you're banding birds and you have them in the hand, but that get their name from their skinny little legs and that really, there's a ridge on their shin that looks sharp, I guess. So sharp-shinned is where they get that name from. And I actually forgot to change there. Yeah, anyways. So sharp-shinned hawks have pretty short, rounded wings, long, much more tail showing, and all their tail feathers are pretty even. So often they get like more of a squarish looking tail there. They have a dark gray hood effect, whereas the Coopers would have just a dark the cap there. You're going to be able to compare these birds there. So here's an adult sharp-shinned hawk. Again, these birds are small. They're only really like robin size. So when we show them up on the screen, that makes it just give them a much larger appearance. But they are hunting other songbirds mostly for food. So an adult usually has this rufous or rusty color barring on the chest. They have a red eye too as they get older. That's not always something that's easy to see from a distance. And there's that squarish tail. The even tail feathers there. That's the juvenile. You see how the shape didn't change much? You know, we go back and forth on these birds. The shapes don't change, but the markings do. So this is a juvenile that has vertical striping or streaking They're a little more brown overall in color, a light yellowish eye. So their eye color changes as they get older. And this tail's a little beat up, but still have that squarish tail there too. So that's the sharpshin. Another one is the Coopers. This is another common backyard bird. These birds also are becoming more urbanized. Their population in cities is growing. Pigeons and doves and things like that. Starlings are pretty easy prey for them, so they got a good food supply in our urban settings. So Coopers looks very similar to a Sharpshin. They still have those long, short, rounded wings, long tail feathers, but the outer tail feathers are shorter, so they give them a little bit more of a rounded appearance on that tail and tip there. The head usually looks a little bit bigger, a little bit larger than a Sharpshin. So the Sharpshin's kind of a little more puny and bulgy-eyed. But this is a close-up view of the head showing the dark kind of cap for the adults. That gray cap there is something that will stand out on these birds. So in flight, again, they look very similar to a Sharpshin. This is a juvenile bird, so it's got the streaking on the chest, but the streaking is a little more fine, not as blobby and thick as a Sharpshin hawk might be. Also has a little bit more head kind of projecting past the edge of the wing, the leading edge of the wing. Okay, so little quiz. Sharpie versus Coop. Which one is the Sharpshin hawk? Who wants to take a guess? On the left? Oh, the left? Yes, this is the Sharpshin. That's actually the same picture I showed you. It's a different one, though. So here, why is this a Cooper's hawk? So look at the more rounded tail appearance there, a little bit bigger head showing through there. But, the coloring is very similar, so it could be very easily confused. I understand that. But you can when you start to know what to look for, then you get better and better at it. Okay. All right, moving on to the third group and final group of raptors we'll talk about are the falcons, and they're a very exciting group, of course, to talk about because falcons are built for speed. They're very dramatic too in their flight. Note the shape is very pointed, very angular, very long, pointy wings, streamlined bodies, and long tails. So they are built for maneuvering and fast flight in open spaces. Many of them are bird eaters as well, but they catch their birds in open country. Kestrel is not as much of a bird eater, but they do depend on their swift moves. They eat a lot of rodents out in the open fields and grasslands and such. So there is a little bit of difference in diet for them, but we have 3 species of falcons that are here regularly. Occasionally in the winter, you might have a gyr falcon in the area, but these are the 3 main ones. American kestrel, the merlin, and the peregrine being the largest. Okay. We will go through them from smallest to biggest. Most colorful of all our North American raptors, though, without a doubt, I think, is the American kestrel. They do have a difference in coloring between males and females. The male has the bluish on the wings and usually a more solid tail pattern. Female is all kind of that rusty color mixed with the dark barring on the back and the tail pattern too. Very striking facial markings though, as all falcons have some sort of kind of mustache mark that extends down from the eye there. It's kind of like wearing eye black, when you're a baseball player, football player, kind of cuts down on some of the glare maybe from the sun. And they're always out in the open using that vision to find their prey. Okay. In flight, there you have those nice pointy tapered wings there, long tails as well. American kestrels, if you see them from the top side or the underside, they always have these white dots, like a string of pearls on the end, on the trailing edge of the wings there. That's something that will stand out from a distance too. Dark eye color, something that all falcons have, which is kind of neat as well. We're going to get to meet a falcon soon, but I wanted to put this in. This was a recent photo that one of our Raptor education course participants submitted. We do this thing where we do have a Raptor ID challenge, and if you have a photo, send it in. We'll try to work on what it is. This was a really classic for kestrels, though, and a great way to show the size. How small they are. They often do perch along our roadsides, but sometimes on signs, but sometimes on the tiniest little twiggy tree, or on the wires, the electric wires there. So this is a little male. Just hold on to that tippy top of that sign. And they often are found around our meadows or fields or agricultural lands, hunting for football bowls and nice things. Yes.
How much do they weigh?
So, do you want to answer that? This is Isabel. She's one of our interns. So she's been helping out with some of our banding. What do you remember?
Oh boy. The females typically weigh more.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we do it in grams.
That's fine.
I mean, anywhere from like 60 grams. I mean, they're
Like
pretty much
it's 100, like it's like 100 we're pushing it. Yeah. So 100 grams is like it's not even, it's about a quarter pound. Yeah. So I think so, very small amount. I know you're gonna meet the next bird. I have our Merlin here with us. Merlins are just a step up from a kestrel. They are still kind of considered a smallish falcon. They're a little bit bulkier than a kestrel. They just look like, just have a little more heft to them in terms of their body shape, but there's still that falcon streamlined body there, a little thicker legs, but not by much. Merlins are about double the mass, though, of kestrels. They're about 200 grams or so. So it's hard to see that from just looking at them. So there's your typical, also like kind of football shaped head there, helmet shaped head, and then a small beak as well. In flight, here's a Merlin, again showing that angular wing shape. They have a little bit wider wings than a kestrel, so they're a little sturdier in flight, and they don't get knocked around by the wind as much too. We see, when we were observing and counting these birds during migration, we see under all kinds of wind conditions, Merlins are a little bit more steady than a kestrel. And we're going to talk more about Merlins, so because we have an actual Merlin to share. So we'll go into the last species. They're another iconic raptor, known for being the fastest on Earth, fastest animal on Earth, the peregrine falcon. Peregrines have been known to go at speeds of over 200 miles an hour in a dive, and that's how they attack their prey. They will dive on it, knock it senseless, and then capture it and scoop it up with their talons there. So very fast flying birds, and that's what that wing shape attributes them to. They're just a very powerful wing beats and streamlined bodies to help cut through the air with little resistance there. Peregrines are about, I'd say, between a red tail and a Cooper's hawk size-wise there. So a decent-sized raptor. This is an adult on the left, which usually shows they all show that really bold facial marking, but they're just a little generally more whitish background on those dark barring, whereas the juveniles have more of a tawny or kind of beige-ish coloring to all that dark barring on as well. Here's one side by side. Okay. And this is another bird that has benefited from reintroduction efforts. And now they've taken up residence in a lot of our cities, Rochester, of course, being one. I don't know if you have put the falcon cam up here at the birdhouse. I believe you do. They have 3 eggs still, or is there 4 now?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm
not totally sure. Yeah.
So our Rochester falcons are nesting right now again, which is great. But here's a good shot of what the adults look like compared to the juveniles there. And look at those huge, long toes, long talons, great for reaching out and grabbing pigeons out of the sky and stuff. That's one of the common things they're feeding on, especially in the city. But showing how the juvenile has a lot more barring on the chest there. it's a little more camouflagey on the nest too. So that kind of rounds up all the species of raptors that are pretty common here. I skipped to some of the more rare ones, but didn't want to overwhelm you too much. So you've got a little bit of a taste of what the diversity is like out there, and best way to learn more is to just keep your eyes open, but come and to a Hawkwatch site or go out to the parks. We have our event coming up at the end of the month, Bird or Prey Days. So it's another great time to come out and learn more about these birds and some of the research that is being done, or participate in Hawkwatch or a banding station tour, that kind of thing, and learn more. So I have some flyers on the table as well. You can take before you go, so as a reminder to come and visit. And I'll just leave that. Also, you can follow us on our website, our Facebook and Instagram pages. Keep up with the counts. Our counter does post the daily totals at the end of every day, so you can see what's going on, even if you can't get out yourself. You'll get to know what's coming through and the timing of things. So, all right. So we're ready for our special guest.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put the lights on. Great. Any questions before we
I was curious as to what the average lifespan is, especially for the peregrine falcon. Because I thought I had remembered reading that they banned the ones at Kodak Tower, and a lot of them seem to perish in car accidents and things like that.
So and this is pretty true from all juvenile raptors. Like the juvenile birds are going to have lower life expectancy, especially their first year. That's why when they breed, they have more than one. So we tend to see a lot more of the mortality in younger aged birds because they're just not as experienced at life, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always, and there's so many challenges these birds face. But once they get past their first year, then their life expectancy increases, right? And I don't know what the record is for banded peregrines, but I know they can live to be kind of into their 20s, especially captive birds. In the wild, maybe not as quite as long. So general rule is the smaller the species, the shorter their lifespan. Just as the big birds, little birds, they have more predators, more susceptible to different injuries and things like that. So, yes.
I see a lot of red tails even carrying on the road,
Mhm.
and I think that, vultures do the same thing. Will any raptor eat carrion, or just some?
So most of the bigger or the larger species will. I think your common ones are red tails, eagles, bald eagles, golden eagles, as well as the vultures. That's going to be who you see. But sometimes rough-legged hawks too, and some of the other bootial species like red shoulders, perhaps as well. That will they depend on that especially in the winter time when it's harder to find live prey. So that's where you're going to see them mostly. They all could learn to eat dead things, if they needed. We see that we wouldn't be able to care for birds in captivity if they didn't. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be living for them to, for that to trigger in that it's food. So, yeah. But I've seen eagles on carcasses and red tails. That's a common thing. Yeah. So keep your eyes open. And that's unfortunately why some of them get injured, being too close to the road, depending on where that is. Okay. Anything else before we switch gears here? Okay, so we have a few raptors that we care for, Braddock Bay Raptor Research, that are used for education. They're our ambassador birds, and all our birds have been through some injury that did not heal back to normal, so they're unable to survive in the wild anymore. So we're able to bring them out for outreach like this, so people can get the exposure and experience of seeing a bird close and personal. So I'm going to introduce you to our broad-winged hawk here. You ready? You're very quiet, which I'm very happy about. So right now, here you go. But she's going to be little bowy. That's because she's a little leaned over, not her normal posture, but this is part of, we're getting into the breeding season. And so this is a little bit of her behavior and her posture when she sees me, which she's very attached to me. So This is, she'll straighten up in a little bit, but she always bows this time of year when we first have contact. It's just her way of greeting.
So they
So
do get attached to humans.
they can, yeah. Not all of them are like that. She's a very special bird. So she's not an imprinted bird or imprinted on humans because she did come in from the wild. She had been hit by a car. So she has a couple of injuries, permanent injuries. She's missing her left eye, which you might not see that because her face there. She's fluffies there. And she's got some wing damage too. So she's not fully flighted. But she was a juvenile bird. Okay, I've been talking about juveniles quite a bit. So she was just in her first year of life. In fact, this is what she looked like. When we first got her, you can see the different markings there, that streaking on the chest. So we were able to get her age, figure out her age roughly, knowing that when she was found in September injured, she had been hatched that summer. So probably around, end of May, June, sometime in that ballpark. So we know that was in 2016. So she's turning she'll be 9 years old this summer. Okay. But she never quite made it, past New York State on her first migration south, right? So she never made it to Central America, wherever she would have ended up. And she didn't have as much, life experience as an adult bird does, she adjusted or adapted very well to captivity, and we spent a lot of time together in the beginning. So she kind of acts a little like an imprinted bird, but she's still very much a wild bird. So other things are not in place. She's not a human imprint, 100%. But she tolerates. She accepts me, and she's usually a very good bird to work with. It gives us a good chance to look at a raptor up close and really get appreciation for all those features, looking at the talons that they have. Now, broad-winged hawks they mostly eat small mammals and some reptiles and amphibians. So small animals like, meadow voles or chipmunks, a frog, garter snake, or something like that. And they do tend to nest in a little bit more forested areas compared to like our red tails that are like the edge, with tall trees, but they like to be close to the open space.
So I'll have that little puff of white.
So that light part at the base, it's kind of yellowish for her, and a lot of species. That fleshy part of the beak is called the cere, spelled C-E-R-E. That's where the beak grows from. It's kind of like your cuticle where your nails grow from. And their beaks do continue to grow throughout their life. So we do have to trim them. We have to file them down in captivity. They just don't get as much wear and tear as they do out in the wild. So we do have to coat beaks and trim talons every now and then, just to make sure they're staying at a healthy length, because they can get too brittle and break, and that would make it hard for her to eat. So
thing I love seeing, watching the way she very slowly and quietly, little by little, she was looking at everybody in the audience and she looked up. And, and now she's moving a little bit more. But just how she was scanning her environment, like what's safe, what's not safe, who's out there.
Yep, and with only one eye. That one eye is pretty good. I think she's also listening a little bit too. And that angling of the head. I don't know if she's like hearing the whirring of the projector. Maybe.
That's really neat.
That's what I think she's hearing too. So, and this time of year, she's making sure you're all cool because I'm her person. That kind of thing.
Survival.
Yeah, but she's usually pretty comfortable around people. I'm going to turn her so you can see her back. So you can get, again, that sense of those long wings. So here's the wingtips, and the tail length here is pretty short. There's the wide black and white pattern, the wide striping on the tail. She's very good about letting me show you that. So she doesn't mind much. The other birds, maybe not as tolerant. One of my hairs. Stuff to your end. Right? But yeah, broadwings are our most common hawk of the East, but only in the spring and summer. Because they're truly migrant. Their entire population heads out of North America for the winter. But they're hard to find in the summer and the breeding season because they're pretty secretive on the nest. They do like to go in more forested areas like the Adirondacks, the Catskills, and such around here. But migration is where you're going to see them really in impressive numbers. Being so quiet today too.
When do they leave?
They usually head out. They're usually passing back through New York State in September, and then I would say by mid-October, we're most of the Broadwings are out of our area in the Northeast. Then they have some stragglers into early November, but it's a pretty narrow time frame. They start to arrive back here in New York State right around mid-April. And their migration will continue through the end of May and even into the early part of June. The adults always come back first. So the adult, and this is true with most species, you start to see the adult birds because they're in the spring, they're ready to get on territory, set up for nesting. The juvenile birds are not quite there yet. They're not mature. They're not going to be nesting yet, but they'll show up later. So there's not as much urgency with them to get back to the breeding grounds, but they do it anyway. We're going to gear up and get some vocal sounds. Here we go.
Nice.
Little chirps. It gets louder, trust me. The typical Broadwing call is a 2-syllable high-pitched whistle. Not like that loud, fierce keer like a red-tailed hawk.
Oh, that's nice.
This is not it. This is too quiet.
No, it's polite.
Yeah, it's polite. There we go. I'm good at it now. It really is totally a chance. That happened the other day too. We were doing a presentation and I was talking about it and she just started. So I don't know, maybe she does know what I'm talking about. It's hard to know sometimes, but that's a typical, this is our typical spring breeding season, territorial thing, and also calling to me, to a prospective mate, whoever's going to be there, or partner. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How often do you feed them or what time of day?
So usually once a day, and around late morning, early afternoon, sometimes earlier in the winter, just to make sure they get their calories in after a cold night. Although she is housed indoors in an unheated room in the wintertime because they're normally in much warmer climates. So she would not have as much tolerance to the cold here. So she had to come. She's been outside, but she had to come in last night because it got wintry again here. So, yeah.
Does she live with you?
They are housed on private property, yes. So we don't have a center where you can come visit, like Wild Wings does, that kind of thing. So we just use the birds for outreach. Yeah. And we have special permits from the state and federal government to be able to care for these wild birds. So they're definitely not my pets. I have permission to care for them, and only because they're used for education. They have to be used for education.
How many do you have?
We have 4 birds that we use. So we are going to show you the next one, our Merlin. We also have a red-tailed hawk and a great horned owl that we use. Any other questions?
Will they be out during the day to get feed whenever they can, or is it kind of like another bird that earlier, like dusk and dawn type thing?
Yeah, so it depends on the species. Some of the larger birds, they're gonna eat when they can, but we do see like the smaller species. Next one I'm gonna show you, I'll talk about that. Like a Merlin, they will be more active in the early part of the day and then later again and the late afternoon. They need a little bit more percentage, of calories than a larger bird. Like a red tail could get a good meal that'll last them for the day or maybe even 2 days before they feel like they need to get more calories again. So it varies a little bit, but they are daytime hunters, these birds. So unlike the owls, some of the owls that come out and are nocturnal. Okay. All right, we'll let her go back in. Hopefully she'll stay quiet, and we'll let you get a chance to meet the other bird. So you got to meet one of our Bludio hawks. And now we have, do we meet one of our falcons? Switch it around here. Just been resting comfortably. Switch it down here. Now this bird is a little more active usually. She sometimes comes out flapping, but that's kind of their nature. They're higher energy birds and very active compared to some of these others. All right. There she goes. She took me away. So this is our Merlin, and here she's showing off our typical, that falcon shape. When you see it from the side view, that really streamlined body, long tail, long wings, great maneuverability. Those long talons, that's a good sign of a bird-eating falcon or bird-eating raptor. They have a little extra long toes for reaching out and grabbing birds out of the sky. Our Merlin here, she is, as you noticed maybe when she was coming out, her left wing is shorter than the right wing. She had an injury to that wing where they could not repair it, so they had to amputate the very end of it there. So that is her injury. Unfortunately, she cannot fly much at all. She still tries though. And we make sure she has a good number of different heights of perches so she can get up high where she's comfortable but not fall to the ground. So she's got like little steps and different levels to accommodate her needs there. Merlins are, we like to say, small but mighty, and they're full of attitude there. So, when you're small like that, people take you for granted sometimes. So same in the bird world. So they don't really like anyone in their airspace. They're very bold. They see something, a potential threat, even if it's not directed at them, they may try to chase it away. So we often see Merlins chasing the larger raptors around, which is pretty funny. A few years ago, I was actually out here in Pittsford Plaza in the wintertime, and I saw a couple of these crows flying, which is not unusual, but behind them on their tail was a Merlin. So the Merlin was like not having it and chasing them away, which is kind of the opposite. Often you see the crows ganging up on the hawks sitting there in the tree, but Merlins are not going to wait for that to happen. So they're very, very bold, and they can be very noisy too. But she's pretty quiet.
I love seeing the dark marking in the eye. It's
Yes.
almost like it might be small, but look what a peregrine can do when I'm tough too.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I'm just surprised by how small she
Yeah.
is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of strength though packed into this small body. Some of their common size prey are like European starlings, which if you put a starling next to her, it looks almost about as big. So they're very strong for their size.
How do they capture them, like starlings?
So they kind of hunt similarly to peregrines, in that they're looking for small groups of birds or flocks of birds or smaller birds. They may not have picked out their target right away. So a lot of times they'll swoop through or approach the flock and get them up in the air, see, and then they can assess which birds are the slow ones, the slow pokes, who's lagging behind. Then that bird becomes their target. So then they may make a couple of passes to have to figure that out, but then you figure out who's the lagger and they'll target that bird. They often will kind of just knock it or approach it, dive on that bird, knock it senseless, with just the powerful impact, and then they'll have to snatch it
With their talons?
Yeah, typically. Come in, and they come in head first, but then their talons kind of come out to grab. Yeah, it is. There's some video footage out there if you kind of Google it to look for falcons, peregrines, or merlins, chasing flocks of birds. It's kind of crazy to see the maneuverability there. But they're very maneuverable. So They're a success story too. When we tend to think of those the conservation success in the world of raptors, we immediately go to eagles and the bald eagle. But merlins are one that their population is growing, which is good. They're also starting to become more urbanized. In other words, they're setting up territories in our cities, in our suburbs. There's good food sources around, and those of you who feed birds probably know lots of house sparrows, starlings, and things like that. So we have that. Plus, they are very resourceful when it comes to nesting. They don't build their own nest or construct it themselves, but they will take over like a crow's nest or a blue jay's nest or something like that, an already existing structure. Often in an evergreen stand is where they like to be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of things that they've benefited from, in our urban environments. Their resources are there, so that's where they've been taking up residence a lot. They generally are a more northern breeder, but their breeding range is expanding further south into areas like ours. So, and we do see a few of them on migration as well. They don't migrate as far south as like the broadwing hawks do, but so they're a little bit more into the midsummer southern United States, I guess. But they are a little more cold tolerant, so you can see them here as a wintering bird too. And they'll go out in Montezuma too is a good place where the shorebirds gather. That's another thing that attracts them, and peregrines as well for potential food source.
Would you say that again? I don't know if I was following you right.
Sorry,
Seagulls?
not seagulls, but shorebirds, like sandpipers, like the smaller birds there. That's peregrine maybe, like some of the gulls are small on size. That is definitely possible that a peregrine could go for a gull, especially on some of the smaller species for sure, or the terns. But merlins are more like the little peeps, like the shorebirds, the sandpipers.
Do you know what speed they can dive at, or they'll approach?
I don't know that anyone's ever really clocked a merlin. The peregrine's been studied quite a bit. And they don't have as much mass behind them, so I'm sure they don't get quite as fast. But, so I don't have a number to put on it. But they are very speedy. I know this, just from experience of watching them migrate through the Braddock Bay area. When someone says, if you're at the Hawk Watch and someone says, I have a merlin out across the bay, you really need to get your binoculars up quick because it's already halfway to you and it might be past you by the time you get your eyes on it. Sorry about that.
Makes sense.
So they're pretty swift.
If it's within a group, like chasing starlings or something, they're not like diving down. They're moving quickly within,
Yes, somewhat.
Like a border cow or something, getting rid
It's
of
almost like herding, and you're kind of splitting and separating out. Yep. But when they have to get going for the catch, that's when it's going to be very targeted. Yeah.
Birds are amazing.
Yeah, pretty amazing. And so I hope that's, we've wowed you a little bit today and given you some more information, some cool facts to take with you. And you've learned a little bit and encourage you to come out and just keep looking and watching for these birds and keep learning, because that's how we get to know what's going on out there in our environment. They're really good indicators of environmental health too. So that's why we pay attention to them.
We're saying thanks because the more we know, the more we can appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So thank you for
That was
coming
nice.
today. Feel free to take some information if you like.